Welcome back to Inside the Numbers. It is Wednesday, April. We got, as usual, got Tim Anderson joining at TJ Anderson1. Tim, the source Anderson. He's going to bring us the market update in a minute here. But I'm gonna go ahead and just jump right into the COVID-19 modeling revisions this morning, Tim, and then I'm going to rattle off basically what's going on and what we're going to talk about, and then tell us what's happening with the markets. All right. So first of all, the model that the White House uses again, the IHME model, was at around 81,000 yesterday. And we're seeing some big downward revisions, 20% revisions. So now we're at around 60,000 and change, right? So 61, I think it's almost 61. So that is just comparable. And folks, I've been saying that I don't like to compare this thing to the flu, but that is roughly the same amount as a bad flu season. We're going to talk about their statement on why the modeling was updated. We're going to talk about the impact social distancing may or may not have on that model, but also just the statistical soundness of justifying these revisions, which are big revisions. I'll read right off his comments, Tim, and we'll go from there. All right. And then we're going to talk about Dr. Birx at the press conference yesterday. Stunning admission, which I'm shocked was finally asked by somebody in the White House press corps. After all of this time, all of the speculation about who is and who is not a recorded coronavirus death, was kind of relegated to the region of conspiracy theory for a while there. But now we have a stunning admission from Dr. Birx that regardless of underlying conditions, you will be recorded as a COVID-19 death if you had tested positive for the coronavirus. Okay. So anybody, listening over there, if you want today, by the way, I want to mention, if you want today to comment and ask us about anything like we were doing on Twitter yesterday, if you're listening on Periscope or something like that, I can actually see. I don't have to look on Periscope, and I was kind of like monitoring my Twitter feed to answer your questions. We don't have to do that today, so you could just ask me. I'll see it, and I'll answer it, but we're not there in the segment yet. All right? So I'm going to let Tim give us a quick market update. 10:02 Wednesday. Where are we at, Tim?
I've just got to make one comment on the Birx statement from yesterday. The great irony of that is that it was asked the question about if you go into the hospital and you have some life-threatening ailments already, and then you die, and it turns out that you had the coronavirus, or even if you had symptoms of the coronavirus, what will the cause of death be? And she clearly said, well, it will be the cause of death will be the coronavirus. It was asked by people. It was asked by someone representing a stream of thought that we might be undercounting deaths.
Right.
And it's being used as fuel for the fire by people on the right as the fact that, see, we told you you're overcounting deaths to justify all of this post hoc. So it's going to be a great conversation, for the next, who knows, probably week or so. But anyways, the markets are having a little bit of a rebound today. Typically yesterday's action would have been just horrendous for the market. When you have a day where you erase 1,000-point gain in the last couple hours of the day. And at 2:00, the market was up 750 points, extremely volatile into the bell. We closed basically unchanged, but slightly negative. We had been up 1,000 points early in the day. Typically, that would be a technically very negative day, a big red candle on the chart where you close right at the lows of the day after being much, much higher during the day. I think we actually get away with that because it came after a day when we were up 7 to 8% on the major market averages. The Dow was up well over 7% the day before. It had a 1,600-point gain. The Dow and the S&P, the second largest point gain on history. and to be up another 3 or 4% yesterday, meaning the Dow was up 2,600 points in 2 days. It was just too much.
Yeah.
We were just into a territory where we were going to hit resistance. We were going to have some profit taking from people that didn't have a chance to sell on the way down because it happened too fast, and from people who did some very astute buying a week ago when we were below the 2,500 level on the S&P. So where typically that would be a very negative day, my thought coming into yesterday before we were up so strongly in the first hour was, let's just hold 2/3 to 3/4 of these gains. So now we started out with a little positive. We were up maybe just less than 1%. Now we're up about 0.5%. Let's see how the market plays out here in the next couple of hours. But it is discounting a tremendous amount of bad news. The market is a tremendous discounting mechanism, and it's probably the single greatest predictive tool in history. And just to give you an example, McDonald's announced earlier today their same-store sales for March down 22%. Absolutely unheard of data for a fast food chain or any retail, any operation like McDonald's. That's $175 stock. The stock's down less than $1. The stock could be down if we didn't have the coronavirus environment going on and they announced that there's month-over-month sales were down 10%. The stock would be down 8 to 10 points minimum.
Right. Because with companies like McDonald's, Tim, some of this is baked in, obviously, and nobody really feels, that a company like McDonald's is in danger. Right. So
75% of their stores are operational, by the way. Clearly, their seating areas might be closed, but 75% of them are open for drive-through.
Because of what because of what trades in the Russell, what is the Russell doing this morning? That's actually the one that I never took a look at, the Russell 2000 this morning before we hopped on here. I didn't peek at that. Did you have a chance to take a look at that? We might he'll bump in. He's over in the tri-state area, and everybody being home is killing his internet. So I'm sure he'll pop back in a second.
Yeah, I lost you.
There he is.
If that goes on and on, I'll reboot the Wi-Fi.
Right.
Yesterday morning, and it didn't happen at all.
That's the tri-state area, Tim. I mean, you're there, and and for all of the talk about rural internet connection, when everybody's home during a situation like this, the population density over there is just it's having talk about the healthcare system being overwhelmed, broadband's being overwhelmed. But what I was asking before you glitched out is, did you hear me talk about McDonald's? Like nobody really considers, and then you brought up, the percentage of stores that.
And you asked about the Russell.
Yeah, okay. The Russell. That's one I didn't look at today, and because of the nature of the Russell, what trades on it, where are we at? That's one I actually didn't look at.
So right now the Russell is up 1%.
Right. Okay.
The S&P is up 1/3%. The Dow is up 1/3%. You're going to have days right now where the Russell outperforms the Dow and the S&P, particularly if we start to get some positive traction on this big loan program going on, where they're going to go back today and probably be voted on today. It's absolutely astounding. And add, without writing a whole new bill, they're just going to add $250 to the program to bring it up to $600 billion. I am sure there are companies in the Russell that may benefit from that. I don't know if I don't know if it excludes publicly listed companies or not. Stocks and companies in the Russell are publicly listed, obviously. But there will probably be other measures for some of those companies also. The Russell underperformed so severely on the way down, and even during the rally of the last 2 weeks has underperformed. I think at its low point, the Russell was 42% lower than its September high, which was not an all-time high, by the way, but within a couple percent of it.
The name's glitching in my head right now. But yesterday, I'll try to get to this today, folks. Yesterday, I got a couple questions about why we focused more on the PPA loans as opposed to the It's escaping me. EHLA, whatever. I can't remember. ELMA. But it is a different option and program. And people actually ask me, so maybe when Tim is giving a market update at some point today, I'll scoot over and I'll pull it up, because in anticipation of those questions, I pulled up a side-by-side chart to explain what you may not think that the PPA loan is the right move for you, but and then also just for people who are curious. We'll put it up and we'll do a little comparison, because I was able to find a great breakdown from Treasury about what's the difference. So if I have time today, if not, we'll get into it a little bit tomorrow. But right, Tim's saying is that they're coming back. They're going to add another, 250? 250, right. So they're going to add another 250 billion, and that's in response to, partially how much the program's being used. And then also, to be, brutally honest, the criticisms that some of these banks are favoring certain companies, and it's hurting what you and I would think on Main Street is a small business, because the definition of small business is very broad. And I think some people would be shocked to learn a few companies, if you heard their names, that's a small business, and it is. So there's been some criticism there. But all in all, folks, for the size of this government program, I don't think we've ever seen anything rolled out like this. Yeah, it had hiccups on Friday. We addressed them. We talked about it. We went after the Treasury Department on Friday afternoon when we got off the show after reading all these comments from you guys. We wanted answers, and the commitments they gave, at least, you got to admit it, Tim, they made good on most of them. The vast majority of them.
This was rolled out in like such a astronomically short period of time that I think that most people's gut reaction when they first announced it was they'll never get that up and running by Friday.
Right.
It's just inconceivable. It just can't happen like that. Look, the Small Business Administration was never designed to deal with being an interface on something like this. And I don't even know that the money technically has to go through the Small Business Administration's process or through their pipes. I don't know if the money is going directly from a separate account that Treasury has set up to individual banks. I think that there's reasons why, and I think this is kind of important to talk about. There's a lot of people that, from running just a local business to having like maybe a small manufacturing firm, are very interested in this program and probably qualify for it. The small banks are a little bit more, I think, likely to get up and moving faster on this with the large banks, because I think that the little bit of a pushback from the large banks, and it wasn't even really pushback, it was just that they needed some clarity. They needed to do their due diligence. They needed some assurance and official guidelines on what the real definition of some certain things were going to be, and to what degree they were going to be immunized from fraud and abuse, from people going in and applying for loans, that falsifying information, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that you got to realize, you got to go back to the global financial crisis 12 years ago.
What happened with TARP?
Right. And just look at, okay, JP Morgan is not like completely online yet. Okay. But you got to realize that in the global financial crisis, there were banks, and JP Morgan is probably the best example. There were banks that had huge problems that definitely you could say, yes, the government bailed out those banks. Okay.
But Jamie Dimon over there is
but now JP Morgan said, when they first started talking about doing the TARP, okay, Jamie Dimon's mantra for years and years was, we have a fortress balance sheet. Okay. Meaning we can have an totally unpredicted disaster We've got $15 billion in cash. We can handle anything that the economy could throw at us. And he used to talk about the fortress balance sheet. So, of course, JP Morgan went to the Treasury and said, look, we don't need the money. We don't really want to take it. We don't need the money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to be fine. And at the time, Hank Paulson, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, said, okay, I get it. I hear you. But we really don't want to stigmatize those banks that really do need the money, because we don't want to cause a run on those banks by people saying, oh my God, they're going to bail out these banks. I'm going to go take all my money out of that bank tomorrow.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So what Treasury really wanted to do was they wanted everybody to take the money, regardless of whether or not they needed it. Then it wouldn't identify and stigmatize those banks that had real issues. And there were banks that had real issues.
You guys want to...
So Jamie Dimon, being the team player that he was, said, okay, we'll take the money.
And I would let me just jump in there real quick, because there is, Jamie Dimon, right? It was like an all or nothing, kind of deal. And if you really, guys, you want to read something on Jamie Dimon, there's a lot out there. He makes the news all the time, right? But you want to read and I guess I'll once in a while I'll pitch a book that I think is a good book, right? So it's one of my favorite financial books that I've ever read. And I read it years ago, but it'll give you a lot of insight into Jamie Dimon, and not just because it's not about Jamie Dimon. He just happens to be in there a lot. It's about crisis. It's about financial crisis, and it's called Demon of Our Own Design. Okay. And it's by Richard Bookstaber, who was a Wall Street guy for years, money management. He's been, I believe he was a Goldman guy, Tim, Solomon Brothers. I mean, he's just been all over the street and had, one or two run-ins with Jamie Dimon. There's some really funny stories in there about Jamie Dimon, but it'll give you a little bit of insight into why he had just had a different mentality, and he had a different, he did not want to do that. The TARP bailout. He did, but right. Tim just said
they did not need the money. So then after the fact, 2 to 3 years down the road, they got vilified by the press, by ultra far right conservative types, et cetera, et cetera. You took TARP money. We bailed you out. You took all this TARP money, blah, 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 blah. And Jamie's like, I told him over and over again, I didn't want the money.
Right.
I
didn't want it. You made me take it.
You kind of got, you could say that he got penalized for being a team player.
Yeah.
So now, I think JP Morgan's initial gut reaction is, we've seen this movie before. Okay, we'll participate. We'll do all the right stuff. Okay. But you started talking about this on Tuesday. It's Friday. Okay. You got to give us, 3 or 4 days to make sure that this is put together the right way from our perspective.
Right. Right. Well, and so where are we at? Almost the first quarter of the show is almost blown away again. Before we get it, because we'll have a market update again in another 15 minutes or so. So let's move on to these. Let's move on to the new projections today, Tim. Yeah. And I was just on with Robert Barnes last night on American Countdown, and we were talking about modeling and the inherent flaws of all modeling, right? And how really there were some real serious problems from the jump with trying to model this thing. And I'm not a medical professional. I'm just talking about from a modeling point of view. You can't have so many question marks in your actual assumptions. You can have a lot of question marks on the assumptions about the data itself, but there are think about it like this. There are ground rules in models, or at least in good models. There are ground rules, and you can't have so many flawed and so many red flags in the ground rules to the model. So it just will not perform correctly, and it'll end up not even being the same model that you started out with. is my point. The only thing that should really change is the data that you're putting into it. That's why I said yesterday, it's really not true. It's only half true that models are only as good as the data that you plug into them. That's really only half true. When the model is designed and the modeler is deciding, the author of the model is deciding, or authors, what is going to go into this thing? Where are we plugging this data? What is going to dictate how it behaves when we plug it in? That cannot have so many question marks. And I'm happy. I'm upbeat. I see those numbers this morning, and I'm happy. Let's pull them up. Let's pull them up. Let's just get them up here. And let me zoom in so people can see. All right. But yesterday, we saw revisions, which a lot of people, I'm going right to deaths, which a lot of people, were talking about yesterday. This, when the White House initially trotted this model out and they discussed this model, it was about 2 million deaths, could be 2 million and change without mitigation efforts. And now, actually, the first revision that really got people up in arms, or had skeptics, having their talking points. That was the other day when they revised it from the with mitigation efforts. It was originally 100 to 240,000, and the mean was mid to high 100s, depending on the day. That because it did shift pretty much almost every couple of days. And when the White House trotted it out, it was the 100,000 to 240,000 range, low and the high, with mitigation efforts. The revision, what was it? Was it yesterday or Monday, Tim? I think we're now on a daily revision basis here. It was revised down to 81,000 and change. And now today again, let's just take a look at the peak. We're at 60,415. That is the average, and the low end of that could be as low as 31,221. And then still, though, if you look at that high end, which is why this confidence interval is huge. And if you look at the high end of it, it's 126,703. It's not uncommon. And I want people to understand this. It is not uncommon, even for CDC burden estimates during a regular flu season, to have a fairly significant range. Maybe it could be a low of 18,000 deaths from a seasonal flu to a high of 96,000. That is, not unheard of, but that is not typical for, right before the flu season and as the flu season is playing out. I mean, I'd invite you to go and look. You can see the CDC burden estimates for yourself. The average of this. All right, let's just take their average, Tim, 60,415, or their most likely scenario in the middle of the confidence. Well, it's not in the middle of the confidence interval. It's actually closer to the low end. That is a bad, I don't know what you want to call it, a more severe or a flu season, which I think the most recent severe flu season, Tim, was 60 and change, I believe. But in any event, here, let me leave this up so you guys can see it. But in any event, their idea or their claim, which is that this is due to social distancing. It's having a greater impact. And I think the word he used here, Tim, was, all right, because this is what I take issue with here. It is unequivocally evident. And let me read his comment. All right. This is Christopher Murray. And yes, that's Bill Gates's buddy. All right. And he says, we are expecting a foreboding few weeks for people in many parts of Europe. It seems likely the number of deaths will exceed our projections for the United States. All right. So what they're saying there is the outside of, I know that does include the United Kingdom. I correct that. Even before I say it, but that includes, so they're saying Europe will exceed the United States, or at least that's what their projections say. And then he goes on to say, and this is my issue. I take issue with this here. That other statement just is a statement about his modeling. This is what that's about, his projections. There's nothing to dispute there if that's what they believe. But it says, it is unequivocally evident that social distancing can, when well implemented and maintained, control the epidemic, leading to declining death rates. Those nations hit hard early on implemented social distancing orders and may have the worst behind them as they are seeing important progress in reducing their death rates. This is what I'm going to take issue with. There is no way he knows that for sure. He does not know that for sure. It is untrue. It is an untrue statement to claim that you can attribute these adjustments to social distancing. It is simply not proven, or I would say at best. It's not that it's untrue, because in truth, we don't know yet. And we talked about this a little bit today. It is at best unproven. And we're talking here he used the word, we're talking in unequivocal terms. That is the word he used. And that's simply not.
Well, you can say it's unproven, but by what measure?
Right, but I don't even think we're really there yet, Tim.
Measure?
You can't even say by what measure.
But my argument on that would be, why did you have such a large outbreak in New Orleans? Okay, when you didn't have a large outbreak in any other southern city, certainly any city, the population of New Orleans is not a large city by population. Even the metropolitan area is not a large city. There's dozens of cities that are much larger than New Orleans, somewhere in the southern or Gulf area of the United States. It's obvious why you had it. You had it because of Mardi Gras.
Right, but is it because? All right, but here's where you get into trouble. They had
canceled Mardi Gras.
Here, but hear me out. Here's where you get into trouble making an assumption like that, though. When it comes to modeling, all right, is it because of Mardi Gras and the idea that people were that close together?
Of course.
Or wait, hang on. Or is it because of Mardi Gras because of the group of people from different areas where they're coming from? Because of where people come from, the event itself attracts people from various regions.
Right.
And without mass, or at least, large randomized antibody testing of the population, we will never know whether he was wrong. And Louisiana statewide is one of the worst misses in this model. Go look at hospitalizations. Maybe I'll pull that back up in a minute here, but if you look at hospitalizations at this point, they originally estimated 7,000 and change.
Don't you think lots of people from Louisiana, from Baton Rouge, and from other highly populated areas in Louisiana go to Mardi Gras on an annual basis?
Oh, of course. But so do other people that are from all over the place. Right. And that's my point. And we don't know yet whether it's distance and being outdoors, or whether it's because of where those travelers came from. There's too many unknowns in there.
Well, you're never going to know that for sure.
That's right. And
why is the rate in California so low? California has probably a higher percentage of Chinese and much easier travel to and from China than anywhere else.
Well,
they went on a hardcore social distancing initiative probably before even New York State did.
But we won't know whether and that goes for California too.
Right.
In truth, if we're really talking about 80-85% of infected people not knowing at all, then these could be the difference between underlying health conditions, Tim, in the population. We will not know until we do those antibody tests. We will not know whether this virus just hit a wall in the population because of it. It essentially ran through the most vulnerable people first. There may have been more vulnerable people in New York. I'm talking about as a population, underlying conditions, age, disease, weight. I mean, there's just so much that goes into this. And again, the reason why we're seeing these such big revisions, they're trying to quantify something they don't know how to measure, and they're using unreliable data sets. As
clearly,
China was the largest
it's a model. It's a model that had no history,
right?
Because we've never had a situation like this before.
And the Imperial College study.
That's why you've had a very wide range of potential estimates on what the outcome would be. So even when they got off the, 1 to 2 million, okay, worst case scenario, blah, blah. Maybe they were projecting that from H1N1. If you took the range of 100 to 225,000, okay, or 100 to 250,000, that's an extremely wide range.
Very big. Yeah.
Okay.
And if you look at the CDC, when they do this during regular flu seasons, by now that range is not that big anymore. So they start.
Right. But
they
what's very, very different about this situation is that it can be contagious when you are asymptomatic, and you may not have symptoms for days, but if you're in crowded area having face-to-face conversations or interactions with people, you may be transmitting the virus for days before you are symptomatic. I mean, clearly in New York, it was very well publicized that one of the senior health officials in the city of New York got in front of a camera and a microphone and said, I'm going to be at the China celebrations. Everybody is fear-mongering this. It's ridiculous. I'm going to be at the Chinese New Year celebration. I hope you're going to be there too, et cetera, backed up by other senior people on the city council, Why do we have this? Aside from the fact that New York is an extremely dense population per square mile, a lot of 40+ story buildings that people live in, a lot of very tight quarters that people commute in. You're in crowded elevators. You're in crowded subway cars. You're in crowded,
not just crowded
mass transit trains.
Not just crowded, but underground and inside. That's
right.
Again, that's another thing, because when we were asking, well, why is New York so different from California? Well, you look at some of the cities in California, the larger cities, mass transportation, public transportation is a completely different mode. In New York, you're talking about an underground, inside, crowded area. In a place like San Francisco, you're not. It's a lot more outdoorsy. And actually, because of the last few days, we've been looking into this has never happened before. A national lockdown like this, let's be honest, there have been far worse pandemics, and national lockdowns like this have never happened. Quarantines are not the same as what we're doing right now. And there is a shocking amount of wealth of data and research in medical journals about being outdoors instead of being inside. And it's like the complete opposite of what we've been told. And maybe, again, all viruses are different, I suppose, Tim, but it's the complete opposite of what
we've never had a situation where this is extremely contagious, and it's contagious among people who don't know that they have it. Usually when you have the flu, you know that you have the flu, or that you're on the verge of having the flu.
And some of this you don't. Right. And that's a totally like new uncharted territory variable. Right. And I will actually, concede again. I don't think that would change my mind, but I'll concede that I will, because it's an unknown, and any unknown is scary and needs to take precautions with. But the bottom line here is, considering we're not talking about, this is not, and this, I think people who don't support a prolonged lockdown are going to have to start, or they just did a very terrible job at trying to frame this conversation. They let people who do favor a prolonged lockdown make this a conversation between getting back to work because you care about your money and your financial situation, versus lives. You're willing to put lives at risk just to get the economy back. And that's not what this debate's about. This debate, it is a quality of life and life expectancy debate versus a quality of life and life expectancy debate. There are also financial considerations. Whereas the other one is just a very narrow.
But those are very short term.
We'll see.
And the government
I mean, we disagree on that a little bit.
The extent to which the government has backstopped.
So hold that thought. We're 35 minutes in. Just hold that thought.
Unprecedented.
Okay? And just give me 1 second. Just hold that thought. I just sometimes you can get rambling here, folks. Totally go over your thing. So I'm glad there's no hard anything yet. Although there will be. We're gonna get a little better at this. There will be eventually. But anyway, so we're doing a little word from the sponsor. Which way is it? So if you're looking on YouTube, subscribe. People, the number of subscribers matters, and building it from scratch, is going to take some time. But go ahead and subscribe if you like the show. Follow us on the Periscope. If you're looking at the Periscope, throw out those hearts, whatever it is they do over there. And Monday through Thursday, you'll be able to watch it, at least until we tell you. You'll be able to watch it at basically everywhere, wherever you're watching it now. Facebook, like it, go through the motions. But we need those likes. We need those clicks. They do matter. Apparently, I was given this information yesterday that you need to pitch more about this. It matters. It doesn't matter. So I'm pitching. And then if you want to support the show, subscribe to PPD, ppdnews.us/subscribe. And that's how, like I said, the bells and whistles, this will be over, and I have a hopeful feeling that this will be over sooner rather than later. And then we can get back to normality here, which will be a lot of fun. And if you like the show and you're interested, you're going to love it when we get back to normality. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So subscribe if you want to support it. Because that's the way we can do this. But again, if you're on YouTube, click that like button, give us a thumbs up, subscribe. And if you're on Periscope, push the hearts, follow kind of thing. So here we go. All right. So, but why don't you finish your thought? I don't want you to forget. So why don't you finish your thought, and then we'll give them a quick market update after. And I'm going to check the questions while you're doing that.
I got to remember what my thought was.
No, I killed it. I do that to my daughter all the time. I'll be like, hold on, hold on. And then I forgot, Daddy. And she storms off.
I think that the big differential between this, what we're dealing with now, and what we're dealing with the flu. Sure, when you have this, unless you have severe health conditions and you are probably going to battle your way through it and be okay. Similar to the flu. Now, a lot of people say, oh, I had the flu last week. They really didn't have the flu. They had a bad cold, runny nose, cough. They were under the weather for a little bit. But the flu, the event that you take the flu shot for, if you take it, is you're knocked out hard for 4 to 5 days, can't keep food down, liquid diet, constant running to the bathroom. You don't want to do anything but lay in bed with layers of blankets over you until you sweat it out, etc., etc. The flu knocks you out hard for 4 to 5 days. There's no question of potentially going to work. A lot of people say they have the flu. They didn't really have the flu. They had a bad winter cold, etc., etc. If you're older and you get the flu and you get pneumonia, it's usually a big problem. Okay?
We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, and it was like unrelated. We were just, kind of shooting at conversation. People do say that a lot. I'm coming down with the flu, and they don't get a flu test. They don't, they don't know. The flu is no joke. I mean, really. I mean, we just learned to live with it. It's no joke.
Right. That's right.
I'll tell you what, the swine flu was horrible. I don't know. I didn't get, they just didn't. They missed their vaccine target badly. I mean, you talk about missing the mark. They had 6 months to make that target and they missed it. So I think so. You've probably all heard by now. I've told the story a couple of times, but I definitely caught the swine flu because they were not quarantining sick people. There were not enough beds. They were not prepared. I went to the VA for an unrelated reason. Was healthy, 28, back then, and this guy,
And there was a vaccine for it, but there might have been a couple
they
different
didn't have
strains.
them. They didn't have them, even though there was a
Right. They might
vaccine
not
at
have had
that
them in
point.
stock, but there
They did
was
not have
a
them. Right.
vaccine for the swine flu from when the swine flu was around in, the mid 70s, 76,
Right. And they were the benchmark for that vaccine.
75, 76.
Their benchmark for that vaccine, the 6-month benchmark. So around April, they were shooting. I'm talking about the Obama administration. It was supposed to be about 100 million vaccines, roughly. That's what they had. That was their target. And by that time, come the 6 months, they had a little over 11 million, I believe, or just under 11 million, something like that. But yeah, when I was there, I said, this guy looks terrible. What'd you put me in here with? This guy looks like he's dying. Everybody knew about the swine flu. So everybody did, I did, my family did, suspected that this guy had the swine flu. It was that bad. Like Tim was saying, people say they have the flu, but this man looked like he was on his deathbed, and he was really in a lot of trouble. And that is, the swine flu is no joke. The flu is no joke, but the swine flu is no joke. We asked for a vaccine. I had a kid. I have 3 kids, but at the time, my first son was only a few months old. They wouldn't let me go home because it is, unlike the coronavirus, it is much more dangerous to the young and youthful. I was 28 years old. I can imagine what a 4-month-old baby, the danger a 4-month-old baby could have been in as a result of the swine flu. It was bad. It was bad. My fever was high, really high, 104 something. It was terrible. And I had to wait 2 days for Tamiflu. I wound up basically myself almost turning the corner, but the Tamiflu really, really helped. But yeah, people say I got the flu, and they wind up not. They have some form, these coronaviruses, Tim, they've been around for a very long time, and people just don't know them. You know what I mean?
Right.
We haven't really spoken about this word. I really, really wish that I could say, and I just can't do it yet, but people are going to find out about, don't email me questions, folks, tweet me questions. Don't email me questions. But yeah, I'm looking at watching the thing over here. I really hope soon we can talk more about what these researchers with the vaccines have found out. We're just not there yet. I can't do it, but while coronaviruses have been around for a very long time, there's something very different about this one, and people are going to find out and soon. And eventually, maybe it'll be something that's just a seasonal thing, that comes back and forth. But what about the testament to really, again, we're crushing on these models. Look at that testament to American medicine and ingenuity and how fast they moved during this, right? I think that the one big criticism looking back is that we blocked out a lot of voices. Not everybody agrees with this lockdown strategy. They just aren't there. They've been muted at this point. You're not allowed to hear from them. But as the totality of the medical community and American science, which is another reason I oppose the lockdown, or at least a strict lockdown like this, because there may be brilliant people out there that just aren't doing things that society could, use right now. And that's unfortunate. We've actually, the university over here is one of them. They're doing some great things. That could be an interesting segment, actually. But, what do you think, Tim, about the testament to American medicine and American ingenuity? This country it's the best country on earth. The stuff they've come up with in matters of weeks. It's amazing.
I think that, that's how we'll get out of this, frankly. You have obviously a number of different remedies that are undergoing tests. You have some remedies that people have a high degree of confidence in. And I think there's certainly the evidence and momentum building behind the hydroxychloroquine is getting stronger by the week. I think that whether I have absolutely no medical field, never really cared for biology, chemistry in school,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. But clearly there'll be some remedies that work for some people better than other people, depending on what your other health background is, and what other characteristics you have. And that's going to be a question for your medical provider. And clearly, not all medical professionals are going to agree 100% on everything.
Right. And I would, this thing has shown us the ingenuity of the American, medical profession, and just not just them, but so many other areas too. It's the ingenuity of the American people. And at the flip side of that, it's also shown us that American media is not as smart as you might have thought. They don't know the definitions of several words. This thing has really taught us that. Per capita, the meaning of the word anecdotal. I mean, I could really keep going on and on, but Tim was just talking about the hydroxychloroquine studies, the data on hydroxychloroquine, and this use of the word anecdotal first of all, even if they were using it correctly, it still would be wrong, because at this point, anecdotal is not multiple studies in multiple countries, even though, albeit those studies are small. That there are large numbers of vaccines and treatments that never went through these large, including, by the way, the one Dr. Fauci is so highly respected for. I mean, and the media just kind of like took this stuff and ran with it. Everything is an anecdote. So all data is anecdotal in a certain sense. It's just true. That's just it. What they have done here has used the word anecdotal broadly to basically define anything that hasn't been subjected to large, blind, randomized, and I mean large, even a couple hundred people, several hundred people, 600 people. They've lumped in with this word anecdotal. And really this standard of being subjected to these very strict, very large studies, it's arbitrary. It's really arbitrary. And did you see that report in the New York Times? I wanted to make this an entire segment and just go off on, Vogel. Did you see that report on the New York Times about, they don't actually say it. What they do is that I see your question, Malicious. I'll answer it soon. Give me a second. Okay. So basically they're insinuating that Donald Trump has been pushing hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for the coronavirus, a multi-decade old drug that is no longer under patent, that is cheap, with a very low profit margin. And he has anywhere between $100 and I think $600. I looked at the math yesterday. They said he has a financial interest in it. Tim, we're talking, it's most likely around $100. $100. That's it. And that these are like his friends, and that's why
he has a controlling interest in the company Sanofi that's doing the controlled test on it right now.
So you did read it. Yeah. So
look, if you wanted to be a conspiracy theorist, you could the reason that the pharmaceutical industry does not want hydroxychloroquine to be the standard to fight this is because they would like to create a brand new drug with a brand new name that's never been used anywhere, that won't go off patent for 7 years or whatever the time period is now. I think it's 7 years. It used to be. And then they can charge top dollar for it. The government's going to pay for it anyway, so who cares what the price is? And they can say they created the new cure for hydroxychloroquine. It's the new cure for coronavirus. It's not hydroxychloroquine. It's not any of the other products that are out there that seem to work for a large percentage of the people. And hydroxychloroquine is a very inexpensive drug. It's been around forever. Okay. There's probably numerous generic versions of it. Okay.
Right. And disappointed
already on the market that have already been being used by many, many, many people.
The point of this, Tim, is that the report has it exactly backward. You just said it. You actually just said it. The idea here that the scrutiny should be on Donald Trump because he has a $100 investment in a pill that doesn't really make that much money, that's been around for decades for multiple purposes, malaria, lupus. It's ridiculous, and it's also totally backward. Big money and big power and big pharma here, and all these, I know that the Bill Gates stuff, believe me, they don't want a large, cheap, scalable, a long time, been around for a long time, well-tested, safe, cheap, scalable treatments and a solution to this virus. That's not where the money is made in these things, especially during a pandemic. Tim just exactly right. The money is made in new drugs, new vaccines.
Now, the other thing that I'll throw out there, just because you're a political guy, your politics is your thing. We haven't heard one word, not one word, from either Cory Booker or Bob Menendez on this topic. Right. Not one word. And the only reason I bring that up is that every big major pharmaceutical company is headquartered in New Jersey.
Sure
if they're an American company, and they, I'm sure, give hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars to the campaign and the political and whatever political action group is lightly affiliated with either Booker or Menendez. It'll be very interesting to see if they ever say anything about any of this, because we haven't heard one word from either one of them.
Right. And it is, by the way, the quote I just read before, so I'm stunned that they're scrutinizing, that they would focus and spend their energy, their time, and their resources scrutinizing something so ridiculous. And then, anybody who mentions, like the Gates, connections are thought to be,
well, I'm sure you saw the woman from Michigan who's a state representative.
I did.
In the state legislature. Did we talk about this yesterday?
We didn't.
I can't remember.
We didn't. We got time.
And she was sick. She'd been sick for 10 days, close to 2. She couldn't fight it. She finally got her doctor she finally said to her doctor, what about this hydroxychloroquine stuff? I've heard Trump talk about it on a number of occasions. I've heard some other doctors say it's worked for their patients. He said, well, let's try it. Sure, let's try it. Boom. She was better in like 2 days.
And by the way, Governor Whitmore that day banned it. And so she was relatively lucky.
I think Whitmer had banned it a couple of days before that.
Take effect. Yeah. Right. And
right.
it being who she is, and, I guess, I don't know, I suspect him that she had a little bit, she said herself too, that it wasn't easy, but I suspect other people would have probably an even more difficult time, at least that day.
She was on again last night, and she gave a full-throated endorsement to hydroxychloroquine. She said she would be dead if she hadn't been taking the drug. And she was thankful over and over and over again to President Trump for talking about it.
Right. And, it's TDS, I guess, in part, just
hugely.
I mean, this is just crazy. I mean, at the point before the FDA had fast tracked it, and we spoke about this last week, right? The point before the FDA fast tracked it, I can understand. But once the FDA green lights something, that's why we have an FDA,
right?
Then you're ready.
I don't know how some governors like Hogan in Maryland can still have it banned.
And by the way, the statement I read before,
and you'll know, and that's where Johns Hopkins is, and that's why the studies on it at Johns Hopkins have ceased, because Governor Hogan in Maryland has banned it. And Dr. Oz was talking about that the other day on at least one show, and he's been tremendous and he was pissed.
I heard it was that last night. I heard that he was
he's been on nightly on numerous different shows, and a close associate of his that's been very involved in treating lupus people lupus patients, I should say, out on the West Coast, has been very vocal supporting hydroxychloroquine also as a something that will help. I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of people. Okay.
And I gotta make,
look, when there's guys like Dr. Oz and guys like this guy in California, I think his name's Watson, but it escapes me. And this guy Smith that was on a couple times. There's just too many really, really legitimate practitioners that are fully supportive of this.
You're talking about the lupus doctor. I mean, he essentially is the largest lupus. I think he inherited that, and it was the largest lupus care provider in the country when he inherited it, I believe, which was
I don't know the background of it.
In 1984.
Yeah, I don't know the background.
I mean, this guy has been this guy, and the word he used, by the way, because a lot of people go on TV and they say, the president was pushing something that's unsafe and untested, or it's been around for decades.
Right.
He said that in all the years that he's been prescribing this drug, he has, never had an issue, and that the risk of hydroxychloroquine is nil. He basically said that even the we heard a lot about the potential for an arrhythmia, and even I said that it looked like with the Z-Pak and the hydroxychloroquine that I mean, I'm not a doctor.
The Z-Pak has that side effect.
If it's right with
certain people,
that's right. But he made it out like, at least alone, and with the drugs that are for other prescriptions for lupus patients, he's just never had that issue. And it was, so we might have even been overstating that danger, is my point. I've got to mention this though, because people are going to say, why didn't you mention this one? And they would be right. So we're talking about, the scrutiny the New York Times gave Trump for this, this pushing this drug and insinuating that he has a financial and friendly interest in pushing this drug. Look, Christopher Murray, who is the author of the study and the man who wrote the comment that I just read out loud before when we were talking about the revisions today from the IHME model, okay, that he is where he is because of Bill Gates. That's absolutely true. So imagine if these people would spend their time, resources, and energy actually investigating or looking, you don't have to investigate, but researching the background of the people who are pushing public policy right now. The other folks have been, like I said, it's not that people don't disagree with the, what did I coin them the other day here? I'm going to keep to this. I'm keeping to this, the economic calamity and collapse club. All right. It's not that everybody agrees with them. That's not true. It's just those voices have been muted out. And we're going to investigate the voices that have been muted out while not looking at somebody like Mr. Murray, who is, like I say, he's the author of the study. He is where he is because of Bill Gates. That's like, I mean, I'm sure he'd be somewhere else, but he's at the IHME because of his work with Bill Gates. Let's be real. This is the guy pushing public policy right now. They're not looking at the models. They're not listening to the doctor from Yale and the White House. I mean, maybe Trump is, maybe, but I'm talking about that's not shaping public policy. Why would you waste time for the New York Times resources and efforts to try to correlate $100 investment with why Donald Trump is pushing this policy? It's just totally ridiculous. Stacy, I read your question before. When I get done doing my little spiel, I'll come back and I'll answer these questions. And then Judd Jill or whatever, very good question about how long this thing's been in our population. And don't let me forget that, because, we have spoken about this before too, that, I mean, there are a ton of people who say, you know what? A couple of weeks ago, or whatever it was in January, I lost my sense of smell and my taste, and then ended up feeling like, I had pneumonia. And again, we'll have to talk about this with Dr. Birx's statement. I really wanted to mention that before, but pneumonia deaths, I mean, it's just so much dropping off while they're attributing everything to the coronavirus. We're having overlap here, is my point. There's like intertwining of data sets, Tim, that should not be intertwined. And in fact, revisions to CDC burden estimates, like we heard Dr. Birx talk about, like including everybody in the death count, that is one of, it's a major reason for big revisions to burden estimates. It's a major reason during a regular flu season, for instance. So the patient had the flu, but maybe they were originally counted as a flu death, but they're not, and they died because of this or that or the other thing. That is a major reason for revisions. And we are now, the difference in the situation is that we know that they didn't die solely from the coronavirus, yet we're just punching in the code. And that's just not how. It's important for people to understand that is not how this is done in a regular flu season or for any other, pandemic or any other burden estimates that the CDC put up. It's just not the reality of it. All right, well, we're at 10 o'clock. Let me do my little spiel. Then we'll get another market update from Tim. I'm real curious to see what it's doing. Normally on a daily basis, guys, I just got outside of the 2 hours now blocked off for the show. I got the stuff everywhere. So I hunger for it myself when I can't see it. All right. So anyway, the show's on Periscope. If you guys are watching on Periscope, give us the hearts, follow wherever you're watching. I think it's out on mine and on PPD. Follow both, whichever one you're watching right now. Hearts matter, all that stuff matters. If you're watching on YouTube, where is it at? Click the subscribe button over there. There it is. Click the subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. And if you want to support the show, ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. Very simple, short code. And that's the way you could support the show, because that's where it comes from anyway. So, like I said with Tim, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to when we could just get back to normality here. It's going to be different. Tim and I are kind of freewheeling this right now, but this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm having fun. Everybody, I don't know why I resisted this long, Tim. I don't know why. I don't know. People are like, you better do this. You should do this. And I'm like, I don't want to be about. This is fun. This is so much more fun than editing stories, everybody else's stories. It is. So it's a blast, and it's going to be more fun. So if you want to see it expand, and if you want to see a lot more bells and whistles when we do, and actually we'll probably try to phase that in even before. I don't even want to wait for the rest of society to decide, or policymakers to decide. And that's what that was what I said yesterday. I would really like to see, I don't want to put anybody at risk or anything. I'm talking about there are ways we can do this to expand it, even while we all wait for normality to return. So if you want to support it, again, ppdnews.us. ppdnews.us/subscribe. Follow TJ Anderson on Twitter right there at TJ Anderson1, and you all know where to find me. But important, since we just started this, push the like buttons, push the subscribe buttons, and let's get back to the markets. It's now 11:02 Eastern Standard Time. Where are we at, Tim?
The market is having really a very constructive day. The breadth internals of the market are very positive. The major averages are up between 1.25% and 1.5%, but they're all really just on the verge of getting close to what could potentially be big psychological round number levels, and also some areas that proved to be tough resistance levels yesterday. That would be Dow Jones 23,000. We are like literally 30 or 40 points from there right now. S&P 500, 2,700. We're just below that level. And on the NASDAQ composite, the 8,000, we're just below the 8,000 level. If we could get above those levels and close above those levels with the strong breadth that we've got in the market right now, advanced declines were about 3-1 yesterday. They're running a little bit better than that this morning. And also one other very encouraging sign, we spoke about the Russell 2000 yesterday. Just for everybody that's not familiar with it, that is what they call a small cap index. And basically it is the stocks in the Russell averages. They're a large indexing operation like Standard & Poor's, but the Russell 2000 is stocks number 1,000 through 3,000 on a market capitalization basis in that index. It's the most widely followed benchmark for small cap and what a lot of people consider to be potentially small cap growth stocks. That's up 2.25%. The bigger averages are up 1.25% to 1.5%. And that to me is a little bit of mean reversion, meaning that the Russell had underperformed drastically on the sell-off we had late February throughout March, and has even had less of a bounce off the March 18 to 23 lows than the other averages. So it's encouraging to see that average outperforming a little bit today.
All right, that's good stuff.
The other thing that's worth mentioning, just real quick,
go ahead.
Is oil is up 3%, and they are going. OPEC is going to have a meeting of what they call OPEC Plus members tomorrow. It's going to be a virtual meeting. Allegedly, they already have an agreement with Russia, which is the key player that they need to get involved to cut production somewhere in the range of 10 to 15%. I would just say that we need to have reasonable expectations about what that will do to the price of oil. It may put a floor under it. It's not going to push it back into the mid to high 30 levels, which we really need until we get demand back online for that, which won't happen until a lot of the world economies get back in gear.
All right. While we're still on the topic of the economy, right? That was like one of the first questions. And the question is,
Rich, do these questions. I got somebody buzzing my door. I'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Go ahead. Are we going to be able to bring back our economy? And you know what? He's going to laugh if he goes back and rewatches this show, because we differ on this. Tim and I differ on this. So I think that is, this is America. We can always bring back our economy. All right. While we're still standing and are a free country and a free market, or something resembling, which is what I call it, what we have right now, I call a hologram capitalism, right? So if you go, it looks like it, but if you really, really test it and try to reach out and touch it, that's when you realize it's not exactly how it's been, sold, but still, we are the largest free market system still. And as long as we remain so, it can come back. The open question is, how long will a recovery take? Traditionally, historically, the bigger the decline, the bigger the bounce back. And that could even translate into the, faster, how quickly it could come back. My view is a little bit different than Tim's. I don't think that we can still expect to see a quick snapback if we continue this trajectory for much longer. Tim has different views on that, and I'll even ask him when he pops back in to give him his side. So we have all views here, but we have never seen numbers like this before. These are historical firsts. And, everything's a historical first under Donald Trump, so maybe he would buck that trend. But the open question is, how long will it take? And I think if we start to phase back in sooner rather than later, by midsummer, we could be seeing huge job reports. I think Reagan has the record for most jobs added in a single month. I think it was 700,000 and change at some point. We have now set the record for the most lost in a single month, and it will get worse. These were, like Tim and I keep telling you, it will be revised, and it will be revised down significantly. Tomorrow,
yeah, I think you're right, Rich. I think during Reagan, I don't mean to interrupt, but just
Reagan, right?
Yes, he had. I think there were 2 months back to back that both had about 750,000 job gains. And you got to realize, so the economy in 1984 versus 2020, 35 years ago, 750 job gains back then would probably be equivalent to maybe like a $1.2 million or
I
$1.5
was just
million
gonna say, yeah,
job
a million
gains
and a
right
half.
now.
Yeah, about $1.5. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I mean, I haven't done the math, but I was, just in my head, population increases, workforce, probably about $1.5, right? I mean, that's
Right.
not understating it. And we absolutely could see that. That is not that is not out of the realm of possibility at all.
We had 10 million.
That's right.
First-time unemployment claims in a 2-week period. Tomorrow's number will be interesting because keep in mind these are first-time unemployment claims.
Revisions too.
Yes, we'll have some revisions, but look. So how many first-time unemployment claims will there be on the third week? It's not going to be 6 million. It might not even be 3 million. It might be 1 to 2 million. But I think it's got to be a sharp, given that it's first-time unemployment claims.
And I think we are, though, likely to see a nice sizable revision to that as well. I mean, a negative revision to the prior week. I just because of where that week fell, these are initial jobless claims.
And a lot of states were overwhelmed.
That's right.
Systems crashing, et cetera, et cetera. So
the top line number is a lagging indicator. It lags by a week. And then in the unemployment insurance benefit report, that's the weekly jobless claims report that we cover. There you have the top line number that lags a week, and then you have the other data that lags even longer than that. So there are revisions that go back several weeks, and then the unemployed number, which was under Trump at an all-time low. It hit 1.1, which is technically the all-time low, and stayed most of the time during this latter part of Trump's term, and 1.2%, which is 1/10 of a percentage point off the all-time low, but incredibly low. Just an extremely tight labor market. Historically, he had the best labor market. He really did. And Trump is like, under Trump, the era of Trump is the era of extremes. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, we have extreme highs and extreme lows. We didn't get into the small business optimism index yesterday, Tim, and just I'm a little bit it's a day old, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. I was actually a little bit surprised at the resilience that it showed. So it fell from 104.5 to 96.4, which is historically.
I mean, my gut reaction was, how could it be north of 75?
Right. It wasn't terrible considering everything, but it was the largest single point decline in the history of the index, 46 year history of the index. All right. So yeah, malicious. I hope that answers your question. Tim is a little bit more optimistic than me if this shutdown continues. I'm not. I think that this really needs to get phased in soon, because the good news is that, like I said yesterday, on my way to work, on my way into the office, there are all of these people I know that are in the community. And I pass the other businesses, my dry cleaners, the guy who cuts my hair, where I buy fish when I want seafood at the market. And there are so many people, the lights are out. I know those people are going to come back. I know that they had to file a jobless claim, to keep going, but that they will come back. So it will not be a surprise to me if we get a huge, I don't know, Tim, what do you think? It really depends when we start opening up again, but
sure.
Like a month of August or some, would be 1.4 million. That wouldn't shock me at all. It really wouldn't. I mean, those people want to get back to work. And by the way, the benefits that the Congress, it was a stupid provision. I know some people don't think that's a big deal, but I do. It was a stupid provision to put in there for some of those states. That doesn't apply across the board, but it does apply to some.
Which provision is
that? That ends in July. The idea between the state and the federal unemployment benefits, it is technically possible for some leisure and hospitality workers, and that's who we're talking about here, to make more money if they hang tight in July. So there will be people, how many, what remains to be seen, But the jobs report last month, for the prior month, I'm talking about last week's jobs report, that was primarily the result of leisure and hospitality, 701,000 lost. When we get the revision, then we'll get a more accurate picture of who lost their job during this and what industry they came from. And then I'll feel, a little bit more comfortable or not about whether or not we'll be able to bounce off of those jobless claims, sooner rather than later. But I'm just saying, anecdotally, on my way to work, those people want to work. They don't want to be home. They want to go back to work. Believe me, the guy wants to go back in and cut my hair as much as I want him to cut my hair. The driver wants to open back up. Like I said, I went on that little rant yesterday. Thank God I missed myself with that coffee yesterday. Otherwise, that suit would have been permanently ruined. If it's for everybody, I didn't tell on air. I just pulled it off. But I just knocked coffee everywhere. And I was like dodging and trying to continue my thought in the show. I can't believe nobody noticed. And the first thing I said to Laura was, did you notice? Did you hear anything or see anything? And she was like, no, I didn't even. Yeah. So I had to go back and I had to tell her. So, all right, but questions are racking up here. So let's get back to some questions. And then after in the final quarter, so the second half of the last hour, which is this hour, we'll open up Wisconsin. Okay. Because I know there's was a lot of questions about Wisconsin. I actually did that briefly last week, I think. Was it Friday or maybe it was Monday? But we really focused on Florida. And then when the show was over, people are like, I didn't really get to see Wisconsin. I couldn't really see it, that well. Can we talk more about Wisconsin? And then I got a great question yesterday that I just kind of breezed over because it wasn't the topic of the show, but I answered it, quickly. But that, made me decide, let's look at Wisconsin. And then later in the week, tomorrow, actually, we'll start with Iowa and Ohio. Okay. Because the polling is going to show more competitive than, at least right now, we think those states are. We don't really think Iowa is a competitive state, at least not unless there's prolonged economic calamity, which then you guys all know my views on that. I mean, I'm consistent. An incumbent president with a good economy is overwhelmingly favored to win re-election. That goes for Donald Trump too, for other forecasters out there who are now using this, what they believe to be a downturn, to justify not giving him the advantage historically that he deserves. He's not even the worst polling incumbent president to win re-election if you look at comparable periods of his term. Okay. So he was always going to be favored when the economy was doing well. On the downside of that, if the economy is hurting when it's time for re-election, if it's still hurting, then he's in a lot of trouble, and we'll go back and renew and relook at Iowa and Ohio. But for right now, we're going to talk about it. I'm going to tomorrow and Friday, and we're going to talk about why, as of right now, we don't view them to be particularly competitive at all. And I think when I open up those voter files, you guys are going to be shocked. Comparing them to the polls, you're going to be stunned at how really, you'll see. I don't want to get into it. But anyway, we talked about this a little bit the other day. Another question here, Tim. What are our thoughts on how long this thing has been in the population? So we did have a segment on this, I think Monday. The answer to that question is, that's why I want widespread antibody testing, because we won't know until we get that. And the longer we wait, the harder it will be to answer that question. It's not like carbon dating.
We're never going to get a perfect answer to that question.
That's right. Right.
Antibody testing or not, how long's it been in the population? We just don't know. Did people that had, my daughter and a lot of people she works with were very sick, bad cold, somewhere between the cold and the flu in mid to late January, closer to mid-January. Did she have some light version of this? I just don't know. She got tested 2 weeks after that. She had a relapse, and it was during a very, very heavy work period for her, 30 or 40 people working on the same project. She tested negative for the flu and for strep throat. But I mean, this was before they were testing people for coronavirus. So.
All right. Well, and I think that's why, again, I don't think, I mean, that's why I was calling, I wanted to see this sooner rather than later, because the longer we wait, the more imperfect of an answer. And for people like Tim and myself, Tim, he works on Wall Street. I don't know if you want to tell everybody, but that there has been people around you that had the coronavirus.
Absolutely.
I do as well. My vendor has the coronavirus, one of my polling vendors. Basically, there have been a lot of people that we have spoken with that were at risk, I would say. And where I live, there's a lot of travel to and from China for medical and university. And, university is not an industry, but we have a very large program here for Chinese students, and it's one of the larger ones. So the exposure is not going to be the same for where Tim and I are versus somebody like in Iowa, or not even really like somebody maybe in Texas or certain areas in Texas. It's just not going to be the same all around the country. And I do find it, my own personal opinion is that I do find it extremely difficult to believe that this thing was around that long in China and it didn't get here. In mid-January, all the way leading up until March, which is unbelievable, the WHO was parroting Chinese propaganda.
Talking points, right.
Talking points, that there was no evidence that this thing was transmitted through human-to-human interaction. And if that's true, and people didn't know, if the WHO was really being legitimate there, then why was Johns Hopkins already modeling the thing in February? I mean, really, I mean, their second model came out, I think, the first week of February. Right. And it's all in there.
I really think
obviously knew it was human-to-human transmission.
I really think that where that's going to go is that I think this guy, Tedros, who's the head of the WHO, is going to resign. And I think it's going to be predicated on the fact that we are going to withhold funding from the WHO until he resigns and we approve who takes his place. There's already plenty of people in Congress calling for his resignation. And I just think that that's going to build. Right.
Well, at this point, I think we could agree, whether you support the guy or not, if it was anybody other than Donald Trump as the president of the United States right now, this would not even be on the table. This money endlessly flows to these international organizations.
Right.
The U.S. is the biggest. He is so right about this. The U.S. is the biggest sucker in the world when it comes to these organizations. We dish it out to a bunch of people who literally sit around plotting our demise and what they're going to do in the post-America dominated world. It's we have to. I mean, really have to be the dumbest idiots our leaders, and if it was anybody else other than Donald Trump, this wouldn't even be a conversation right now. It just wouldn't. And I'll tell you what, when he said that at the press conference yesterday, I was like, whoa, it's about time.
Look, one of two things is either going to happen.
China-centric, and I think that was he was being nice. I would have found a different word, but he was being nice and diplomatic. He's more diplomatic than he gets credit for, by the way.
I think one of two things is going to happen. We're either going to fix the World Health Organization, and it's going to be run with a lot more input from us, or it's just going to dissolve into a fringe entity that we don't give any money to. And really that what's going to take its place as the kind of the world leader in that area is some combination of the CDC and the NIH.
I'm showing that comment because that's what I'm talking about right there. So we have economic sanctions on everybody. We kept the sanctions on Iran while they were fighting the pandemic. I mean, that's another topic altogether.
Right.
But we say nothing about China. This is not the first pandemic that they have unleashed on us, folks. This is not the first one. This is a more deadly one. So people are paying attention that this isn't even the second one. And we don't do anything. We don't do anything about this. Right. Now, though, I think we may see that tide turn now, Tim. We may. And Boris, I hear he's doing better today. That's very good news. The strongest language against China, criticizing China, came from Boris Johnson out of any Western leader. And he was as of yesterday, on his way to, a ventilator, and it was on oxygen, but he never did get intubated thank God, because that is not a good sign. And hearing he's doing better today. And, that's very good news. I'm waiting when he does recover, God willing, I'm really my ears are going to be open, waiting to hear what he has to say, because he has the strongest language, even though Trump was calling it the Chinese coronavirus. That was like kind of just not, it wasn't about policy. It may have been a signal, but Boris Johnson was very different with his terms weeks ago. And he was saying, when this is over, now is not the time, but when this is over, they have to pay for this. They have to pay. And I'm going to answer this. All right.
Go ahead.
Well, that's what it is. All right. I'm not endorsing Nicorette here. I'm endorsing it for my habit. People are always like, what are you doing with your mouth? I'm sucking on a Nicorette. I can't do a 2-hour show. I don't vape anymore. I haven't smoked in years, but I gave up vaping months ago, and I need the Nicorette. All right. Get over it, people. That's what I'm doing. All right. So go ahead. That goes for you too, Laura. All right. So, so go ahead. What's your thought?
I would say in response to that question or statement that you had up on the screen, keep in mind that we just reworked a very broken trade agreement with China. It took about a year and a half to 2 years to rework it. It's very, very favorable for us. We have not lifted the tariffs that we have on Chinese goods coming into the country. So where we don't have economic sanctions on them the way we do Iran and other people around the globe, the tariff deal that we have with them now is a very, very, very different economic construct to have on China than what we had been operating under for the last 10 to 15 years. And I think that there will be a tremendous push going forward. And I think that probably the UK will do a U-turn on allowing the five-way G5 technology into their infrastructure. And that will be a massive, massive win for our interest to make sure that 5G, once it becomes a common standard around the globe, is not infiltrated by the Chinese intelligence.
Yeah, that's one area I was thinking about. And Huawei, the future of them in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom.
They obviously had Boris had a big spat with Trump over the Huawei 5G products, and I think he's going to do a U-turn on that.
Right. I'm just, my curiosity.
That's the biggest penalty you could put on China right now.
It really is. And, that my biggest curiosity is who's going to lead the charge in this, because, Tim, again, I don't know how many times I could say this, but we can't let them do this to us all the time. We got lucky the last 2 times, that they just weren't this severe of a situation. And then we also didn't have certain forces in the media and in certain communities pushing, like a very one-track, narrow narrative to get a desired outcome. And now here we are. That never happened before, but this will happen again. So whether, it's really irrelevant whether this was intentional or or at least it's irrelevant now. The decisions that have to be made now are to ensure that we don't have to do this again. I don't want to have to listen to Zeke Emanuel, one more time in a year or 2 years from now. I don't want to listen to him talking about 12 to 16 month shutdowns ever again. We need to really, they have to be penalized for this. They have to be punished. China has to be punished. And people who help China, there's like all of these people in bed with the Chinese, and they have to be outed as well. I mean, you can't have somebody like the WHO. You cannot. They would serve a good role, is my point. I guess I'm trying to make here. If everybody unilaterally trusted them and they showed no favoritism any which way.
Well, they've been exposed.
They've really been exposed.
And and that's just going to build. That's just going to build over time. The whole and the pushback on China is going to build over time. And I would just say that people have to have reasonable expectations on what they hear out of Trump, because he is not going to be aggressively combative with China verbally until you get some of the key supply chains in the pharmaceutical industry and other critical supply lines that we have transitioned back to this country.
Yeah, I do understand that. I do. And those are problems that were there before Donald Trump ever came around. And ironically, this is a guy who had been talking about stuff like this forever.
And you're not going to be able to transition pharmaceutical supply lines from China either to here or more friendlier countries in the next 6 months.
Yeah, it will take.
It can happen over the next 2 to 3 years, but it's not going to happen over the next 6 months.
Yeah, something like that would require a Trump reelection. There's just no doubt. I mean, we'll go right if he loses in November, it will go right back to the way it was. I mean, that's the sad reality. I mean, you would think that would
but look, there's no doubt that if
point, but it's not.
Biden becomes the nominee, you will see his very pro-China comments in lights at Times Square over and over again.
Unless something cataclysmic happens to Joe Biden, he will be the nominee.
Yes, absolutely.
It's over because, and I'm going to say this before we do my break, I don't want to cut into the last segment too much because Wisconsin, which we'll talk about, not just the election, but we're going to peek into the voter files here. All right. Bernie Sanders let his own people down. He had this thing. Yeah, Elizabeth Warren, Trump is right about the impact of Elizabeth Warren, or at least at that stage of the race. It's not true now that old Warren supporters are just, automatically jumping on the Bernie train. That's not true now. But back then it was pre-Super Tuesday and even on Super Tuesday, you could take her margin and you could put it on top of Bernie's, and that was his 2016 margin. And there was, honestly, Bernie really shot himself in the foot. He doesn't know how to go for the kill. He doesn't know how to fight. And, it's just ridiculous, but they do against him. It's just ridiculous. He's not a champion. All right. He's not a champion. He let his voters down. And, basically there's also a second element to this, which is that he did very poorly in the rural and white working class areas that he did extremely well against Hillary Clinton in. And it's not just that Joe Biden won those voters. Actually, we've gone back, we've looked at this. That's actually not it. Those were, a great deal of those were Trump crossover votes. And now they're not there anymore because Bernie decided, I'm just going to vehemently attack Donald Trump all the time. I'm going to switch, and this is a biggie. I am going to switch. Everybody says he's so authentic. That's why everybody loves Bernie. At least you know where you stand with Bernie. Bernie had been anti-illegal immigration for 30 years. I mean, how long, the guy's been.
And pro-Second Amendment.
And pro-Second Amendment. And that, look at where we're talking geographically and culturally, the voter that he lost. So his desire to toe the party line. It's weakness. It's cowardice. It's political cowardice. He took 30 years worth of a track record and flushed it down the toilet because, we should just keep using this. He licked his finger and he put it in the air to see which way the wind blew. And he thought that his party needed him to do that. Either that, which one is it, Bernie? Were you lying for multiple decades about your position on the impact immigration has on workers' wages in this country? Were you lying for multiple decades? Were you lying about your position on the Second Amendment, or did you change your position because of political expediency? You can't have it both ways. But here we are, 11:34. Let me go through the rundown so we can get a market update and then wrap it up with Wisconsin. All right. And I'll show you why. I can't remember who asked that, but I'll show you why Ohio is not that simple. It's not. But okay, we'll do that either tomorrow or Friday. But yeah, guys, if you are watching on Periscope, hit those hearts. Follow whichever one you're watching on because it's on PBD and mine. I just looked and saw that. Follow whichever one you're looking at it on. Hit those hearts. All this stuff matters. And I know Periscope, it's being completely slammed right now from everybody being here and everybody wanting to jump on a scope. It's being completely slammed. If it's lagging and not good, which I see some people said, it's crisp and perfect on YouTube, or you can watch it on PPD. It's always on PPD, and we run it through PPD's own player over there. So it'll be crisp, clear, and you'll never have an issue with it over there. And it's free. It's not behind the paywall. All right. At least for now. Fridays will always be free. But if you're having an issue on Periscope, which I've heard the last 2 days, Tim, then go to YouTube or go to PPD or Facebook Live. Nobody seems to have a problem on Facebook Live. And I checked it out a little bit yesterday. But also, too, if you're on YouTube, remember the button. Press the subscribe button, like it, and all of this stuff matters. YouTube has a lot of rule changes. And where somebody's starting something like this from the ground up. But People's Pundit Daily never really used YouTube that much, not unless we were covering something live or I wanted to do a spiel. But we need those likes, clicks. Go ahead and do that.
A little bit of breaking news here. The Wall Street Journal reporting Bernie Sanders is ending his presidential bid.
That's a big breaking news. So it's over for Bernie, according to the Wall Street Journal. It just reinforces what I said, barring anything that happens to Joe Biden or a complete coup within the party, because something happens with him, he will be the Democratic nominee for the president of the United States in 2020. End of story. I said that.
Post reports the same thing. Financial Times reports the same thing. It's definitely done.
That was essentially true. After Super Tuesday, he really blew it. I mean, he blew it. That man was favored, and he blew it. So that doesn't at all surprise me. Interesting. Rasmussen had a poll, or let me wrap up this, but likes, give us the likes, the hearts, the follows, the subscribes, whatever. And if you really want to support the show, you can subscribe to PPD. That is what fuels this engine over here. All right. So ppdnews.us.subscribe, or you could just go to People's Pundit Daily. And the subscription page is up there. There's monthlies, annuals, and then even credits. If you just want to watch the show, you can get like a few credits. I think it's like a credit or something like that, which is $1. So that's the way you can, support the show. So Bernie is out. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit more. I really want to get in Wisconsin. Can we get like a 2-minute market update here, Tim?
Yeah, the market continues to do better.
All right.
The Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ are up between 2 and 2.5%. That's like a 570 point gain for the Dow. The Russell continues to outperform. It's up like 3.25%. NASDAQ's above 8,000. The Dow's above 23,000. The S&P 500's above 2,700. That would mean if S&P closes above 2,700, that would mean more than a 20% rally off its March 23 closing low. 3 big psychological round numbers for the big averages. It would just be a very positive day for the market to hold a good chunk of these gains after having 1,000-point reversal off the highs yesterday and closing fractionally in negative territory. So it's 11:40. There's over 4 hours to go. A lot can happen. We've seen a tremendous amount of volatility in the last 45 minutes of the day over the last 3 weeks, sometimes in the last 10 or 15 minutes of the day. But where yesterday the market was losing steam midday, coming off its highs, today the market feels like it's gaining steam a little bit, coming off kind of a lackluster first 45 minutes or so.
That would be beautiful if we could keep those and hold on to those gains. I haven't confirmed it. I haven't had a chance to confirm it. But I did get that Bing before. That was Wells Fargo. Did you hear about this? Wells Fargo, I can't believe, if this is true, then they used the crisis to get out of the doghouse at the Treasury Department. I'd have to go and look at somebody like the Wall Street Journal that I would,
What if they lifted the cap on how much?
Does look like they lifted the cap. While you were talking, I sent a request.
They haven't lifted all of their penalties, so to speak, of all of the additional oversight. But because they want so many banks to participate in this,
right,
they must view that if you've been a customer at Wells Fargo for the last 3, 5, 10, 15 years, and it would be very difficult for you to just go get a loan through this program by going to another bank. They don't want you to be penalized because of that.
Right.
So I think what they're doing is they're viewing that we don't want to penalize Wells Fargo customers.
It's the customer, right?
Because of the sanctions that we put on Wells Fargo. We never imagined a program like this would come into existence when we put those restrictions on Wells Fargo, and we don't want to penalize their customers. So we're going to lift the cap on this, but all of their other regulatory oversight, I'm sure, is still in play.
Well, I sent an email to Treasury asking, but it does look like now there are other people reporting it. So, again, I'm a confirm first, kind of guy. I like to get it myself, but it does look like that is the case. So, right. So, it doesn't hurt the Wells Fargo customer. So,
right.
Again, though, this is the kind of stuff that's the screwy kind of things that happen during times like this. They would have never have had that. I wonder if it's going to be temporary, which is the second half of that question, by the way. So I said, is this true? And then is this a temporary measure?
They might be lifting their
maybe we'll have that tomorrow.
Regulatory cap on whatever metric it's assigned to, just for this program.
All right, let's 11:42, because I don't think I want to end on Wisconsin. I think I just want to throw it up, and then there's always a couple of things. So if we talk about Wisconsin for about 8 minutes, then we can come back and do something better. I just undid the model because the whole point of doing this is pulling it up, letting people see what I'm doing, and then they'll know themselves, as opposed to what they get from other people, which is just a finished product. So I want them to be able to see when I hit that button and generate it, just so everybody knows that I did not do anything, or tip my thumb or put my thumb on the scale. So background here. When we first started tracking Wisconsin, going back to, I think it was, we really started monthly tracking it, not polling wise, but tracking the underlying electorate. It was before the 2016 election. And then, with periodic, gazing into it, a month, every couple of months. Scott Walker, when he was first elected there, some of the things that he did with labor unions, there was an open question on whether or not this would have a real impact. It started out, even going back to 2016, it started out with a Democrat advantage. Some months we'd look at it, it would only be a few points, maybe 2-3 points. The high was about 6. So I'm talking about just the electorate. What not who's going to show up to vote, just the overall picture of the electorate. And Democrats used to have a pretty sizable advantage. The reason why Republicans were able to win is because they vote at higher rates, okay? Or at least they're more reliable, all right, is a better way to put it, because they don't always vote at a higher rate. And independents lean Republican in that state in the last 6 cycles more than not outside of Barack Obama. They like Barack Obama. And it is true to call them, or to have called them, the Obama Walker voter. About 6 to 9% of the electorate in Wisconsin that would vote for and support Barack Obama on the presidential level, but then vote for Scott Walker in the gubernatorial races. And they now have become the Obama Walker Trump voter, because the Democrats thought they were going to get these voters simply looking at the trend on the presidential level. They do trend Democrat in presidential races outside of Donald Trump's example. They did not go for Mitt Romney. They didn't go for John McCain. They didn't even go for George W. Bush. Not like this. All right. Even though we're starting to go back, some of those people weren't even in those groups at that point, but that's why our model is a 4-cycle rolling model, because the electorate looks so different after 4 cycles. You're basically just plugging in terrible, unreliable data. You're talking about totally different electorates at that point. So let me bring up the screen and bring it up Wisconsin. All right. And ever since, like I said, ever since Donald Trump, here, let me pull this up. Ever since Donald Trump, this has changed. And it was pre the 2016 election that we really saw a pretty wide shift to Republicans. And a lot of that, I've talked with Sean Trendy, showing him this from Real Clear Politics. He's a bit convinced that this really is a lot to do with Scott Walker and what he did with, labor unions over there, the reforms that he put into place, that it had a real world political impact in the state of Wisconsin. All right. So I am only, as usual, starting off with our baseline here, which is excluding dead people and recent movers. Okay. And I'm going to this is always my defaults, folks. I explained this yesterday, but maybe some people weren't watching. Party, gender, household income, marital status, inferred ethnicity, education level, and religion. All right. And there's a reason why. I mean, these are the largest indicators. All right. So this is why these are defaults. And we could add more in there if we want. There's so many data sets we could do if we wanted to, but I don't really want to go through that. Let's keep it as simple as possible for right now. Second most recent lender name. See, when I tell you, I mean, this stuff is so deep, people's hobbies, then that's why when I show you something that says inferred Republican, inferred Democrat, we're not just talking about voting behavior. The database is about 145 million people, 143 million people, but there's so much that goes into it. It's cross-referenced with consumer files and lending and all sorts of federal contributions, state contributions. It's just there's just a wealth of data that goes into this. So when it says inferred Democrat, inferred Republican, you can pretty much bet your bottom dollar that is accurate. And there are areas where I have just played around to see, just for my own benefit, if I know from the Secretary of State's office, some states don't do party registration, but if I know, like a state like Virginia doesn't, if there's a state that I do know, like Florida, and I turn it off and I don't want the actual number, I'll do inferred just to compare. And it is very accurate, just to let everybody know. So I'm going to hit this, let it refresh, and it's tallying it up here. Okay. Here we go. So obviously we have a large number of unknowns here. Okay. A large number. This is what typically, outside of turnout, this is what typically decides the election. And again, these aren't reliable to anybody. Wisconsin is very swingy. These voters right here, 27% or so, there really is about, on any given cycle, 7 to 12. Really, I mean, I say 9 a lot because that's been a pretty solid estimation, but 9% of these people swing, and they can really make all of the difference. But if you're looking just at the overall electorate and the built-in advantage, this used to be anywhere from D2 to D6, high of D6, and now it's a little over R4. All right. And that has bobbed and weaved. That's changed a little bit. So, like I think it was July, Tim, the last time we actually published one of these in a more readable format for people to see. I think it was like Republican 5-2 or something. That's not a trend. Month to month, these things bob up and down. But generally speaking, Republicans have held on to anywhere between a 2 to 6 point or 5.5 point registration or base edge. Let's just call it a base edge. I don't want to say registration. Let's call it a base edge. And in any event, we were talking about yesterday, and why I wanted to bring this up is because somebody had asked the question: is it true that Wisconsin is trending toward Biden or trending Democratic? We see no difference in the trend. Really, there's no difference. This has been pretty stable. It is that number and those swings. What you really need to look at is that 26, 27, 28, and sometimes it goes around. It's even as high as 30%. Those unknowns, they're not really unknowns. What that tells us is that those are independent, unaffiliated, whatever term you want to use. Okay. They have remained pretty consistent in that range. That's a lot of people. In the Marquette poll, which Trump was leading in, and now he's like trailing by 3 or something. If you go in there and you look, you'll see he's actually, independence isn't his problem. He's doing well among independents. And if he carries them by 1 to 3 points, like estimated, then he would win, all other things equal. The problem he had was that he did not solidify his base support in that poll. So Biden had almost uniform support among Democrats, but he didn't. Trump, the same was not true for Donald Trump. So that's why Biden led in that poll. Also, too, this may be their modeling. This is my major criticism with pollsters. They really should let the world know more and let news consumers know more about where they came up with these, what they waited for, where they came up with their electorate modeling, what goes into their likely voter model, and we don't get that, not nearly enough. So in any event, all things considered equal, watch that number with independents. And if Trump is holding onto that margin with independents and he does solidify base support, which passed his prologue, and history tells us that they will solidify, behind him, and his approval rating, generally speaking, among his own party is historically high. And typically we see more crossover or more undecided in the base until we get closer to the election. And then, the candidates typically solidify their support among their party. That doesn't always happen. But with Donald Trump, I do fully expect that to happen. That's not what I would be concerned about for Donald Trump in Wisconsin, in a state like Wisconsin. What I'd be concerned about is how swingy those voters are that I was showing you before. At 27 to 30%, they are swingy. It could be upwards of 12% of the entire electorate that truly is persuadable. Although, again, I go back to that 9. I really do, Tim. It's really like 9%. If we go back to 2010, which is about as far back as I'm willing to go because electorates change. If we go back to 2010, that really dumbs down to an average of about 9% of the entire Wisconsin electorate. And it is. And that can make all the difference. And if they swing hard against Trump, like they swung hard against against Republicans in 2018, then you can see the damage that can be done from that. But then again, you had Jim Hagedorn win that seat. Those very same voters voted for Jim to be the Supreme Court justice just a little while later. Right. They do change. And by the way, the Republican get out the vote effort in that state it's good.
That's Scott Walker.
It is. He built that from the ground up.
He built that from the ground up. And he knows he could pinpoint 2 houses on an intersection in rural northern Wisconsin that's 4 or 5 miles from anyone else, and know, and call them up on the phone if he had to.
is so true. That is it. It's a well-oiled machine out there, and it did not transform. It did not translate, by the way, to support for Mitt Romney because Republican voters, didn't really like
He
Mitt
was not an
Romney. It's that
inspiring. He
he
was
was not.
not
It's
an
not at all.
inspiring candidate.
Scott Walker won the races he won because he was an inspiring candidate to his own base. He got people out to the polls in a way Mitt Romney could not do. And the same was true for Donald Trump. And even though there still is a contingency in Wisconsin that doesn't, a constituency, a Republican constituency that hasn't quite warmed up to him. Cruz won that state in the primary.
That would be the hard conservative,
the purists,
far right, probably budget hawks,
the purest of the purists,
right?
Yeah.
And there are some very popular talk radio people in Wisconsin, that are right in that wheelhouse.
And let's keep them unnamed. But I know what you're talking. Yeah, absolutely. But in the end, if those independents hang on, then I mean that's why I say why we showed people three different models.
I think he'll be good there. I mean, I think it's a very interesting state because even though a Republican hadn't won it since 1984, whereas Bush 41 won Michigan in 88. I'm pretty sure he won. I think he even won New Jersey in 88. I think he won Pennsylvania in 88. Wisconsin's always been very, very close. I mean, but I think Bush 43 only lost it by 10,000 votes.
That's right.
In his, I believe, his second election.
Yeah,
so
he made
it's always been very, very, very close. Where like Michigan had been voting for the Democrat by 7 or 8 points.
Yeah. And I would, he made a very, very big play for Wisconsin. Bush, W. He made a very in his reelection bid. Also Pennsylvania, huge push for these states, and just came up short. The bottom line is with Trump is obviously a little bit different, and we'll talk about this more with Ohio later in the week.
Right.
The same thing with those southeastern Ohio working class voters. They have no chance. Biden has no chance in that state unless he wins back those people, and we just haven't seen that yet. In Wisconsin, it's the bow wow. It's all about bow wow in Wisconsin. I mean, of course, you got to run it up in the upper in the upper and western part of the state.
And you got to restrict the voter fraud as much as possible.
And
if you're a voter fraud enthusiast, I'm sure that Bush 43 losing that state by 10,000 votes in 2004 was, you could bring out the voter fraud issues there.
Well, if you can keep the approval numbers in Bow Wow where he has them roughly now, and had even in the New York, going all the way back to when New York Times polled that state just recently. I mean, it was a couple months ago, but it was before Trump saw his bump. If you can keep that number in the Bow Wow, then I mean that's Jim Hagedorn level. I mean, it would be close, but he would eke it out. We don't look at this stuff the same way. I mean, there are certain areas where you have to perform. There are certain targets that you have to hit. If you hit them, you will win. If you do not hit them, you will lose. And there are ways to offset it, but it's not like you got to get into this. So it's not like it would be an open question. If he can hold those numbers, he'd be better. And that's why those independents, they're really very important. And if he's holding those numbers in the Bow Wow, that means, the independents right now have not, abandoned him, or at least not their back, because they will go back and forth. And I would warn you guys, they're going to go back and forth. You may see another poll in a month or two, and it's ugly for him. That's the way they are in Wisconsin. But if he holds those numbers, outside the Milwaukee suburbs, where Paul Ryan, Racine, all those areas, that means in the end, Republicans are going to vote for him. They're going to come out and vote for him. So, we got less than 2 minutes here, Tim, less than a minute 40. So I'm going to do my last spiel, and we'll take it out. Tomorrow, we'll do Iowa and Ohio. If you think this has surprised you, considering how hard it is for Republicans to win Wisconsin, if you think this is surprising, wait until you see Ohio and Iowa tomorrow. Okay. And we'll talk about the region specifically in Ohio, because that used to be the center of the battleground states. And now things change. Things change. Just like when Danny Kaye and Bing Crosby made White Christmas, Vermont was a solidly Republican state. And now it is the state that continues to elect a socialist curmudgeon from, things change, times change, things move on. So we're going to look at what matters, which are those, the turnout level out, for Democrats in, outside of, Franklin's looking much better for them than it did years ago when George Bush ran there. But at the same time, the southeastern part of the state is looking horrible. So again, before you click off here, if you haven't done your hearts or followed on Periscope or whatever it is, do that. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Give us the likes, give us the thumbs up, whatever. These things matter. And if ultimately you want to support the show, go subscribe to PBD. That's the best way to do it. All right. That's pbdnews.us/subscribe. Follow Tim Anderson, Tim the Source Anderson on Twitter. It's right there at TJ Anderson1. And you guys know where to find me at peoples_pundit. We will see you back here. Thanks for watching. We will see you back here Thursday morning, tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. And we're gonna have a lot of fun. We're gonna have a great show. We'll get into Iowa first, then Ohio. All the best, folks. Have a great rest of the day.